guys, it's Ariana. Welcome back to my channel. So for tonight's video, we're going to be reading some more scary stories. So I attempted to do a spooky look. I did a spider-ish coming off of my eyeliner. I don't know. I was trying to do a spooky look to go with today's video. It has nothing to do with spiders, but that's just what I ended up doing. So if you guys are interested in this makeup look, it will be up on my short section. It'll also be up on my TikTok. So without all that rambling out of the way. So I have a bunch of your guys' personalized spooky stories that I'm gonna read in today's video. This is from the ghost story section. It is from the Reddit author J Fleming 5648, and it's titled My Childhood Ghost Encounter. I don't post often on Reddit, but after thinking on it a long time, I decided to speak here about my encounters. I usually don't tell people about these experiences because I get the, you were just seeing things, or you were just young and you were probably dreaming. I'll also say that I've never had a paranormal experience or encounter since, and I'm very thankful for that. This fear and confusion that comes from seeing certain things has a lasting effect on the mind and is not something that I've ever forgotten. I get very emotional speaking about these nights in particular. I appreciate any insight you all may have, and thank you for taking your time to read this. My first encounter was when I was very young. I believe I was around 5 or 6 when it occurred. My household growing up was a very dark environment. We never really had much, but aside from that, we stayed together and we loved one another. I'm not sure if it was the energy of that place or something that had happened there before that caused what I saw. My sister had been kicked out of the house by my dad at the time, and I was sleeping with her regularly. I was young and scared of the dark, and I generally just didn't want to sleep alone. One night, I woke up suddenly facing the window of my room. It being a small, single-wide trailer, the rooms weren't big at all. My dad, being the way that he was, had taken the door off because he didn't trust me for some reason or another. I just remember waking up, rolling over, and seeing this girl in a white dress in my open doorway. Her hair was black and she had no shoes on. Her hair covered her face and I couldn't see any of her features. I felt a foreboding feeling coming from her, and I just knew I shouldn't blink my eyes. I was afraid she would rush up and be in my face when I opened them, so I stared at her for as long as I could. As I did, I felt this pulling sensation as if she wanted me to come to her. I knew that this wasn't a good idea, and to be honest, I was terrified that I was basically a statue. I stared as long as I could, and eventually I had to blink. When I did, she was gone. I'm not sure what would have happened had I went to her, but I'm very glad I didn't. Keep in mind that during this time, I was way too scared to watch horror movies or anything like that. I'd never seen her before, and definitely not after. My second and last encounter came about 1 or 2 years after that. I had just come home from a Valentine's Day dance and was getting ready for bed. I tended to sleep near my parents' room, or if I could on the couch, because I felt safer. I had a great night with no negativity at all, which is why I can't explain this situation any further. While trying to sleep, I started to hear a weird noise, kind of like what people who eat with their mouth open sound like. I was very confused, so I looked down the side of the couch at the floor and saw what looked like a head. I stared at it for a minute because it was making noises. Eventually, it slowly started looking up at me, and I could see that it had the features of an old man. It was smacking its mouth, and it looked like a lot of blood was coming out of it. I got terrified and I jumped up. I stomped on the head, and I don't remember feeling anything solid other than the floor when I did it, and ran into my parents' room. I crawled in bed beside my mom and I tried to go to sleep. I wanted to check my surroundings because I still felt unsafe. I saw the head everywhere now, like it had duplicated itself, all over the sheets and all over the floor beside the bed. All of them were staring at me and smacking their mouths. All I could do was put my head under the covers, and eventually I fell asleep. I'm not sure if it was the toxic environment I grew up in or what caused any of these incidents. I've never forgotten these experiences, and I have never even wrote this long of a post on Reddit. I just felt like I needed to get it off my chest and see what some others might believe. And that's their entire story. So I don't really have any answers for what you saw or what happened, but that is absolutely fucking terrifying. Holy crap. I can't imagine seeing like dismembered head in my house. That's just not okay. That's just terrifying. The next one that I'm going to read is from the paranormal encounter section, and it's from the Reddit author witch-and-where, and it's titled My House is Haunted. Instance number 1. I was probably about 13 at the time. We had just moved into my house and my family went out to eat, but I didn't want to since it was late. This means it was just me in the house. I was sitting down on the sofa with my cat watching a movie when out of nowhere, I heard a man's voice from behind me say, "Here, kitty, kitty." My cat didn't seem to acknowledge it, but I heard it clear as day, and when I turned around, no one was to be found. Instance number 2. Probably about the same age, I had what I believed to be a trickster of some sort around my house, as I would trip over seemingly nothing and hear laughter right next to me. I would also place things down in my bedroom only to find them go missing. Nowhere to be found. When I went back for them, my first instinct was that my siblings had maybe taken them, but no one had gone into my bedroom besides me at the time. Eventually, I would just say, "Could you please put insert item name back here? Thank you." And suddenly, it would be back exactly where I left it. Instance number 3. Probably about a year or two later, I was maybe 14 or 15 at the time, and I was going up to the mountains behind my house for a hike. But it was the dry season, so all the prickly bushes and such were over the hill. So I turned around to go back home. As I'm walking back home, I hear an indistinct talking, and then what sounds like somebody muttering through a megaphone. It sounded like they were right in front of my house. Definitely would have been heard from inside. So I ran inside and asked my mom what all the noise was. She responded, "What noise?" Instance number 4. About 3 months ago, I'm now 18, my grandfather had gotten sick in another country and wasn't doing very well. My mother had this weird feeling that he was lost. I had gone into the den of the house and started pacing because I have anxiety and that's what helps me not panic. As I'm walking, I see out of the corner of my eye someone following me. Feet behind me, glimpses of a face when I turn around, but only ever out of the corner of my eye and never in full sight. Instance number 5. About a week ago, actually, my mother, sister, and I were the only people in my house that believe in the supernatural. We were all standing near the fireplace talking about whether or not my mother was going to buy my grandfather's ashes from the funeral home in another country. When all of a sudden, we heard a loud bang on the wall, and my mother's mailbox, where she keeps her letters and such, fell to the floor. It was nailed to the wall. The only thing that fell out was her checkbook, a pen, and a few old credit cards. So, I guess my grandfather really wanted her to pay for him. Holy crap, those are all of the encounters that they have in that post, and that is a lot of activity in your house, and it sounds like your grandfather was now haunting your house too. So that is really terrifying. Holy crap, I can't imagine. I'm so sorry that your grandfather died. That is really, really, really sad, and that is just a lot of encounters in your house. Holy crap. The next story that I'm going to read is from the True Scary Story section, and it is from the Reddit author A Woocorn, and it's titled, "The Old House I Lived In Was Scary as Heck." So I used to live in a small town in Texas. This house I lived in when I was a kid was a rented home. Quite cheap, about $400 a month. We didn't know it, but bad things had happened in that house. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to a child with black eyes staring at me from my bedroom closet, swinging his legs back and forth as it sat among my VHSs. When it noticed that I was awake, it smiled at me. I remember screaming and calling for my grandmother. When the light turned on, it disappeared. I refused to sleep in that room after that. The second room I lived in for a while had a door to the attic, and the door would always be open for some reason. One day, my grandparents were not home, and I decided to close it myself. I felt something grab my hair and tried pulling me into the attic. I heard feral-like growls and other noises that still haunt me to this day. I did escape because my grandparents came home and I was on the floor crying and bleeding. I never trusted tightly enclosed spaces in that house again. Because of those things, I remember being dragged from my bed at night when my parents were away and waking up halfway off a California king-size bed with bruises around my ankles and scratch marks up my arms. I also remember a cat fighting thin air one night when I was close to one of the closets, and weird-like screams coming from whatever my cat was fighting. I don't live there now, and the house is condemned, but some of my old neighbors say that they see something in my old bedroom windows, black eyes and all, just staring out the window. Holy crap. Being drugged from your bed in the middle of the night is my worst fucking fear. being pulled into an attic, that is just straight paranormal activity there. That is like the very first paranormal activity. That is like, no, nothing about that is okay. That is absolutely fucking terrifying. Holy shit. I hated everything about that story. And I'm so glad you're okay, but the fact that you literally had bruises and scratch marks and you were bleeding, what the actual fuck? I hope you guys moved like instantly because Jesus Christ. The next story that I'm going to read is from the Backwoods Creepy section. It is from the Reddit author Call My Bluff, and it's titled Something Told Me to Go. Hi everyone, I've debated posting this for a long time, but never got around to it. Mainly because I try to keep this memory out of my brain. This might be a long one, but this is creepy things that happened to me about 4 years ago. For starters, I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan and moved onto my aunt's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that was on her property. The house is fairly old, but I loved it. It wasn't long after I moved in though that I started to feel uneasy in the house alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as if it felt like something was watching me through them every single night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company when my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house. It helped to have the company, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of a scene setting, our house sat on the left side of a gravel road. At the back of the house, there was about 10 meters of backyard, and then there was a cow pasture and a cow barn. We didn't own cows though, but in the summer, another farmer would rent our pasture space, so we would have them on our property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes surrounding the farm either, and there were tons of them. Every so often, when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for my comfort. We had a farm dog too, who would keep the coyotes away for the most part, as she was huge. But every so often, she'd wander elsewhere on the property to scout for the coyotes, and they would get a little too close for comfort again. They always tried to lure my puppy out over to them, but luckily, I always kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that it takes forever to find a spot to go to the bathroom. This is still a problem today, 4 years later. But back then, it was the bane of my existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot. Sometimes we would be out there for damn near half an hour, just so she could go to the bathroom and not go in the house. On this particular night, it was raining pretty heavily. I was not happy to be outside, and she had decided that she wasn't gonna go until she found the perfect spot. We had already been out for about 15 minutes at this point, and I was getting frustrated with the rain, and I wanted to go back inside. But I needed her to go before we went in. It was dark and I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually very quiet and sleeping at this time of night. I was also hearing what sounded like a strange bird whistling, but I shook it off as probably being an owl. I tried to keep it off my mind as I kept shouting and pleading, "Please go to the bathroom." I was facing away from the pasture when suddenly, in my left ear, I heard, "Go." Now, one thing you should know about me is I have a very strong fight response typically, but this froze me on the spot. And I was mostly confused as what the fuck I had just heard. I tried telling myself I didn't hear anything. And I tried telling myself that it was just the moo from a cow that I heard wrong. But again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it again. Go. Go. It sounded unnatural. It was as if it came from someone who had never spoken a word before. A raspy, deep, monotone go. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio. But of course, there were no radios out there. And every time I said it, it sounded like the exact same as the first time it was said. And whatever it was had started repeating as it had been taught its very new favorite word. At this point, I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there. Then again, from behind me, I heard it again. This had all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point, I remember shouting out loud, "All right, you don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my little fur ball and made a mad dash for my front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. My puppy went back to being a puppy immediately. Obviously unbothered by it all and happy Mom wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and I called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows. She said no, and I explained to her what had just happened. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me he hadn't seen or heard anything strange. He said he checked the pasture again in the morning. I spent my night hiding from the windows with the lights and TV on loud enough to not hear any other noises. The next morning, when my uncle checked on the pasture, he found 2 calves died. It explains the colossal cow panic that ensued the night before. I regret this, but I didn't push for more information as I honestly just didn't want to know. But they told me, other than that, they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. A few months later, I moved off the farm. I couldn't be in that house alone anymore, and my boyfriend and I had parted ways. A few months after that, I started going to therapy for paranoia that this had caused me. I started feeling like people were always watching me or out to get me. Another few months after that, I moved out of the province for good and finally felt safe. I'm wondering if any of you have any ideas what the hell this could have been. There's no chance that they would have been something in our field, as we are fairly far away from town and neighbors, and we have cameras that would have seen anyone on our property. Coyotes are common, like I said, but I don't think they're capable of mimicking words. Any ideas? And they have an update, so that was the one that I was originally going to read. Okay, I've since moved 2 provinces over and now live in the interior BC. Think Shuswaps area. I've lived here for 3 years this coming June. Recently, I moved into my boyfriend's house in town. Our house is situated beside the main highway that goes through town, and there's a big hill with a walking path behind our house leading to the highway. I've heard coyotes frequently on the hill and often find coyotes while my dog and I do our walk on the path. This isn't entirely relevant to the story, but I think having a bit of visionary on what the area looks like can be important. Now, about a month ago, I went to take my dog out around 7 p.m. It's winter now, so it was already pitch black outside. As you can probably guess from my last post, I'm not a fan of going outside after dark. Though living in town and having cameras at each end of the house does help, and I'm often just fine going out as long as the lights are on. I opened the door and I got my pup's leash on, stepped out and felt a tug on the leash behind me. I turned around to see her refusing to go through the doorway. Think Sheba level walk refusal. This is strange for her, as she loves being outside and would never pass up the opportunity. She eventually tiptoed out behind me and we made our way to the middle of the backyard. She seemed off still, staying low to the ground, tiptoeing across the yard. She stared off toward the side of our garage for a couple of seconds and then bolted back towards the house, dragging me with her. She's about 45 pounds wet, but when she wants to, she can overpower me. I blame it on her being mostly husky. And after being dragged to the house, I also paused for a moment to look toward the garage and I saw nothing. We have a motion sensing camera out there and it hadn't gone off. For reference, this thing goes off for a fruit fly and goes past 10 feet away from it, and my boyfriend checks it every time he gets a notification. After seeing nothing there, and we walked back out into the middle of the backyard, and again, she froze and stared up toward the side of the garage. It was around this moment where I heard a familiar whistle, and my dog darted again. This time, with the hot on her heels, shouting, "Nope, no thanks, I get the hint." We slammed through the door at full speed. Much to our surprise, my boyfriend, who was in the kitchen, swiftly locked the doors behind us. After explaining what had happened to the best of my ability, he offered to go outside and look. Me being the strong, independent idiot of a woman I am, I took this as a competition for some reason and responded, "No, I can do it, give me a flashlight." I went out with the flashlight and I snuck around my own backyard for a couple of minutes. I searched for a few minutes and found nothing around the garage, and I went back inside feeling a bit better. The next night, when we went out, we heard something run away from the other side of the garage, the side that doesn't have a camera. And again, we bolted back inside away from whatever it was. As we made our way back out of the house, again came the short whistling noise. Later that night, my boyfriend passively mentioned that the tenant had sent him a picture of a hunk of meat that had been left outside of his door and let us know to be cautious regarding that for our dog's sake. Finally, my boyfriend and I have been having nightmares, and they're usually eerily similar to each other. I've been having nightmares for over a year now, every single night. He started getting them within the last month or two, even when I'm not around. They'll be about similar subjects, and they're almost always life or death situations. We both wake up fairly stressed from them, and they're mentally taxing on us. This is all I can think of at the moment, and I'll be sure to keep everyone updated if anything else happens. I feel like I'm going crazy, but knowing this is now affecting my dog and my boyfriend is affirming. Again, would love to know what you all think. Thank you for reading my crazy shenanigans. So I don't really know what that could be. I'm not entirely sure if that really fits my paranormal kind of vibe that I usually go for stories, but I found those really, really interesting. I did have somebody comment on one of my videos pretty recently asking why I read something that wasn't paranormal. Sometimes I just need to include stories that aren't necessarily paranormal, that are just creepy, into the video to make the video longer, because you guys are always asking me for longer videos, and not always the paranormal stories are super long. So sometimes I really have to just include creepy stories as well. So that falls in the realm of just being creepy, and like I don't necessarily know if it's paranormal, but the fact that it's affecting all three of you is really weird, and the fact that you heard something when nobody was around is really creepy, and it was like mimicking a voice and it was telling you to go at your last property, that's just really weird. So thank you so much for allowing me to read your guys' stories. We are at the 25-minute mark, so this is where I'm going to end the video. I'm going to edit this and post this as soon as possible. If you guys made it to the end of the video, leave me a spider emoji in my comment section down below. It lets me know that you guys made it to the end of the video. It also helps boost my video on the algorithm, because YouTube doesn't like to promote my videos to anyone anymore. It also doesn't like to notify you guys when I post. So that's awesome for my channel. So if you guys could like, comment, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed, that would help me so much. And if you guys have any creepy stories that you would like to share with me and the channel, please feel free to reach out either over my email or over Instagram. They're always in a pinned comment at the top of my comment section. If you guys ever need to know where to send your guys' creepy stories, always to my email or my Instagram. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys at the next video. Bye.